Hi and welcome to the archive of history. Imagine standing before a pyramid in the desert, but this is not Egypt. The sand here is darker, richer, and the pyramids rise steep and sharp, cutting angles against an endless sky. This is a land that was once home to kings and queens who wore double crowns, who commanded armies, who buried their dead in monuments of stone that have stood for more than 2,000 years. Yet somehow this kingdom has been almost completely forgotten. Tonight we will travel to the kingdom of Kush, Africa's lost empire. We will walk through its ancient cities. We will stand in the shadow of its temples. We will meet its warrior queens and witness its rise and fall across more than 1,000 years. Before we drift off, I am always curious to know where my listeners are tuning in from and what time it is that they are listening tonight. Let me know in the comments. And now settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Close your eyes and imagine the hot desert wind carrying with it the scent of incense, the distant sound of drums echoing off stone walls and the shimmer of gold in the midday sun. Our journey begins not in the realm of legend, but in a real place, in a real time, in a civilization that has been waiting centuries to be remembered. The story of Kush begins with the land itself. Imagine you are standing on a rocky outcrop, looking down at a river that has flowed north for thousands of years. This is the Nile, but you are far south of the Great Pyramids of Giza, far south of the temples of Luxor and Thebes. You are in the land the ancient Egyptians called Taharqa, the land of the bow, named for the skill of its archers. The Greeks would later call this place Nubia, and its people would build a kingdom they called Kush. The landscape around you is a study in contrasts. To your east and west, the desert stretches endlessly, a sea of sand and rock where nothing grows and the heat is merciless. But here along the river, everything changes. The Nile carves a ribbon of green through the wilderness, a narrow strip of fertile land where life not only survives but flourishes. The seasonal flooding of the river brings rich silt that nourishes the soil. Date palms sway in the breeze. Fields of barley and sorghum stretch along the banks. The air is thick with the calls of birds, the splash of crocodiles sliding into the water, and the distant bleating of goats being herded home before dusk. This is not an easy land. The Nile here is interrupted by a series of rapids and waterfalls, great cataracts where the water churns white and violent over granite boulders. These cataracts divide the river into sections, creating natural barriers to travel and trade. The first cataract marks the traditional southern boundary of Egypt. Beyond it, the river becomes more difficult to navigate. The second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth cataracts stretch southward, each one a challenge for any boat attempting to move upstream or down. Between these cataracts, the river valley narrows and widens, creating pockets of arable land, small kingdoms unto themselves, isolated yet connected by the eternal flow of water northward toward the Mediterranean Sea. The people who first settled here thousands of years ago were herders and farmers. They moved with the seasons, following the flood, planting in the rich mud left behind, harvesting before the dry season returned. Over time, these scattered communities grew more complex. They built permanent settlements, circular huts with mud brick walls and thatched roofs. They domesticated cattle and learned to craft pottery decorated with intricate geometric patterns. They traded with communities to the north and south, exchanging animal skins and ivory for tools and grain. And slowly, over generations, these settlements began to organize themselves into something larger, something more powerful. This land between the cataracts became the cradle of one of Africa's most enduring civilizations. The natural resources of this region were its blessing and its curse. The deserts that flanked the Nile were not empty wastelands. They contained treasures that would make this land famous throughout the ancient world. Gold was found in the eastern desert, in veins running through the dark stone. The Nubians learned to mine it, to extract it, to work it into jewelry and ornaments of breathtaking beauty. Ebony wood, dark and dense, grew in the forests to the south. Ivory came from the elephants that roamed the savannas. Incense and myrrh, precious resins burned in temples and palaces, were harvested from trees and carried north along trade routes that stretched across the known world. These resources made Nubia wealthy, but they also made it a target. To the north, the growing power of Egypt looked south with hungry eyes, seeing not just trade partners but subjects to be conquered, resources to be exploited. Yet for centuries, the people of Nubia resisted. They built their own culture, distinct from Egypt, even as they traded with it. They worshipped their own gods, created their own art, developed their own political systems. The first great kingdom to rise in this land was called Kerma, named for the city that served as its capital. By around 2500 BCE, Kerma was a thriving urban center. Imagine walking through its streets in the heat of midday. The main avenue is lined with workshops where craftsmen shape pottery, weave textiles, and work leather. The smell of wood smoke and cooking meat drifts from the houses. Children run barefoot in the dust, chasing each other between the buildings. In the distance, rising above everything else, you see the great Deffufa, a massive mud brick structure unlike anything found in Egypt. Its walls are thick and high, pierced by small windows that let in shafts of golden light. This is a temple, a storehouse, and a statement of power, all in one. The people of Kerma buried their dead in circular tumuli, great mounds of earth and stone covering underground burial chambers. These were not simple graves. They were complex structures, carefully engineered to last forever. The most important individuals, the kings and queens and high officials, were buried with astonishing wealth. Their tombs contained beds made of wood and leather, inlaid with ivory. There were fine pottery vessels, bronze mirrors, jewelry of gold and semi-precious stones. But most striking of all, there was something the Egyptians never did. The rulers of Kerma were buried with human sacrifices, hundreds of people who were killed to accompany their king into the afterlife. These were not prisoners or slaves, but members of the royal household, servants and soldiers who chose or were chosen to follow their ruler beyond death. Archaeologists have found these burial sites, the skeletons arranged in neat rows around the central chamber, each person dressed in their finest clothes, some with their hands still clasped in positions of prayer or reverence. This practice tells us something important about Kerma. This was a society with its own beliefs, its own understanding of death and the afterlife, distinct from the Egyptian worldview that would later become so influential. The Kermans believed that the journey to the next world required attendants, companions, an entire household to serve the king in death as they had in life. It was a belief rooted in the communal nature of their society, in the idea that kingship was not just about one person but about the entire community that supported that person. As the centuries passed, Kerma grew stronger. Its trade networks expanded. Its military became more organized. Fortifications were built along the Nile to protect against raids from the north. By the time of Egypt's Middle Kingdom, around 2000 BCE, Kerma was a rival, not a subject. Egyptian pharaohs launched campaigns south, trying to subdue this upstart kingdom, but Kerma fought back, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, but always maintaining its independence and its identity. And then, everything changed. Around 1500 BCE, Egypt entered its New Kingdom period, a time of military expansion and imperial ambition. The pharaohs of this era were conquerors. They pushed Egypt's borders in all directions, and they looked south at Kerma with determination. The armies that marched up the Nile were unlike anything Nubia had seen before. They were organized, disciplined, equipped with bronze weapons and chariots, backed by the immense wealth of the Egyptian state. One by one, the Kushite cities fell. Kerma itself was destroyed, its buildings burned, its walls torn down. The kingdom of Kerma, which had endured for 1,000 years, came to an end. But this was not the end of the Nubian story. It was, in a strange way, just the beginning. Imagine now that you are living under Egyptian rule. It is around 1400 BCE, and Egypt has been the dominant power in your land for more than a century. The cities of Nubia have been rebuilt, but they are no longer truly yours. They are outposts of the Egyptian empire, ruled by a viceroy appointed by Pharaoh himself. This official is called the king's son of Kush, a title that speaks of both authority and subjugation. You are no longer simply Nubian. You are now a subject of Egypt, part of the vast machinery of empire that stretches from the Mediterranean to the heart of Africa. Yet life continues. The river still floods. The crops still grow. The markets still bustle with traders. But everything is different now, marked by the presence of Egypt in ways both subtle and profound. The most visible signs of Egyptian control are the temples. Everywhere you look, new structures are rising from the sand, built in the Egyptian style with massive stone columns, hieroglyphic inscriptions, and statues of pharaohs standing tall and eternal. These temples are dedicated to Egyptian gods: Amun-Ra, the king of gods; Mut, his consort; Khonsu, the moon god. The priests who serve in these temples are often Egyptian, though some Nubians have joined their ranks, learning the complex rituals and prayers in the Egyptian language. You might pass one of these temples on your way to the market, see the processions of white-robed priests carrying offerings, hear the chanting that echoes off stone walls. The smell of incense hangs heavy in the air. This is Egypt's way of making its presence permanent, not just through soldiers and governors, but through religion, through the daily worship that binds people to the conqueror's gods. But something unexpected is happening. As the generations pass, the distinction between conqueror and conquered begins to blur. Nubians are not merely passive subjects. They are learning, adapting, transforming. Young Nubian men are recruited into the Egyptian army. They train as archers, the skill for which their land has always been famous. They march north with Egyptian expeditions, fighting in Syria and Palestine, proving themselves among the most reliable and feared soldiers in Pharaoh's forces. Some rise to positions of authority. They return home with Egyptian names, Egyptian titles, Egyptian wealth. They build houses in the Egyptian style. They decorate their tombs with Egyptian art. Their children grow up speaking both the Nubian language and Egyptian, moving fluidly between two worlds. The same thing happens with religion. Yes, the Egyptians bring their gods, but these gods do not simply replace the old Nubian deities. Instead, a fusion occurs. Nubian gods are identified with Egyptian ones. Local spirits and protective deities are absorbed into the Egyptian pantheon. The worship of Amun becomes particularly important in Nubia, perhaps even more important than in Egypt itself. A great temple complex is built at Gebel Barkal, a flat-topped mountain near the city of Napata, where Amun is said to dwell. This mountain is sacred to both Egyptians and Nubians, a place where the divine presence is almost tangible. The temple at its base becomes one of the most important religious sites in the entire Nile Valley. And here is the crucial point. Nubians do not just worship at these temples. They become its guardians. They believe in Amun just as deeply, perhaps more deeply than the Egyptians themselves. As centuries pass, something even more profound happens. Egypt begins to weaken. The new kingdom, once so mighty, enters a long period of decline. The pharaohs become less powerful. The empire fragments. The control over Nubia loosens, not suddenly but gradually, like a grip slowly relaxing. The viceroys appointed from Egypt become less capable, less interested. Local Nubian chiefs begin to reassert their authority. They continue to use Egyptian titles and Egyptian religious forms, but they are no longer taking orders from Thebes. They are ruling in their own right, building their own power bases, competing with each other for dominance. By around 1000 BCE, Egypt's direct control over Nubia has effectively ended. But the Nubians have not simply returned to their pre-conquest state. They have been changed by the centuries of Egyptian rule. They have absorbed Egyptian culture, but they have made it their own, adapted it, transformed it into something new and distinctly Nubian. This is the world from which the next great Kushite kingdom will emerge. Not a rejection of Egypt, but a claiming of Egyptian culture as rightfully Nubian. The stage is now set for one of the most remarkable reversals in ancient history. The conquered are about to become the conquerors. The students are about to become the masters. And the Nubians, who have lived for so long in Egypt's shadow, are about to step into the light and claim the throne of the pharaohs themselves. The city of Napata sits at the foot of Gebel Barkal, that sacred mountain where Amun is said to dwell. It is around 750 BCE, and this city has become the capital of a reborn Kushite kingdom. The rulers here are ambitious. They have consolidated power over Upper Nubia. They have rebuilt the temples. They have organized armies. They look north at Egypt, that ancient enemy and teacher, and they see weakness. Egypt is divided. The north is controlled by Libyan dynasties. The south is fragmented into competing city-states. The great unified kingdom of the pharaohs is a memory, a dream of past glory that seems impossibly distant. But the Kushite kings believe in that dream. More than that, they believe they are the rightful heirs to it. They worship Amun. They write in hieroglyphs. They build pyramids. In their minds, they are not foreigners threatening Egypt. They are the true preservers of Egyptian tradition, come to restore what has been lost. The king who begins the great conquest is named Piye. He is a man of deep religious conviction and military genius. In his mind, the campaign to the north is not merely political or economic. It is a holy mission. Egypt has fallen into chaos. The temples are neglected. The proper rituals are not being performed, and Amun has called upon him to restore order. Imagine you are a soldier in Piye's army, preparing for the march north. The morning air is cool as you gather with thousands of others in the plaza before the great temple. Piye himself appears, dressed in the full regalia of a pharaoh, wearing the double crown that symbolizes the union of Upper and Lower Egypt, even though that union exists now only in his vision and his determination. He addresses the troops, his voice carrying across the assembled host. He speaks of duty, of righteousness, of the favor of the gods. He reminds you that you are not invaders but liberators, not destroyers but restorers. You believe him. Everyone believes him. There is a sense that history itself is being made, that you are part of something larger than any individual life. The army moves north. It is a formidable force, thousands of infantry, archers, cavalry, and chariots. As you march, you pass through towns and cities that have not seen Kushite soldiers in centuries. Some submit without resistance, opening their gates, welcoming Piye as a savior. Others resist and are crushed. The Kushite army is disciplined and well-equipped. It uses tactics learned from Egypt itself, combined with the traditional Nubian skill in archery. At one city, the siege lasts for months. The defenders are stubborn, confident in their walls. But Piye's forces are patient. They surround the city, cut off its supplies, and wait. When the city finally falls, Piye does something unexpected. Instead of slaughtering the defeated, he shows mercy. He lectures them on their impiety, on their failure to honor the gods properly, and then he reinstates the local ruler, binding him with oaths of loyalty. This is not the behavior of a brutal conqueror. This is a man who sees himself as a legitimate ruler, bringing order to chaos. The campaign culminates at Memphis, the ancient capital of Egypt, one of the most important cities in the entire Nile Valley. The siege of Memphis is intense and bloody. The city is well defended, its walls thick and high, its garrison determined. But Piye's forces are relentless. They attack from the river, using boats to assault the harbor district. They batter the gates with rams and siege towers. After a fierce battle, the city falls. Piye enters in triumph, riding through streets lined with defeated Egyptians who now look upon a Nubian as their pharaoh. He goes immediately to the great temple, not to loot it but to worship. He makes offerings to the god Ptah, the patron of Memphis. He cleanses himself and performs the proper rituals. This is his priority, not conquest for its own sake, but the restoration of religious order. Piye does not remain in Egypt. After ensuring that the northern kingdoms acknowledge his supremacy, he returns south to Napata, leaving governors to rule in his name. He commissions a great victory stela, a massive stone monument covered in hieroglyphs, detailing every step of his campaign. This stela is erected at Gebel Barkal, where it still stands today, a testament to the greatest moment in Kushite history. For the first time, the entire Nile Valley, from the Mediterranean to the cataracts, is united under a single ruler, and that ruler is Nubian. The kingdom of Kush has not just survived, it has conquered its former conqueror. The student has become the master, the colonized has become the colonizer. It is a moment of profound historical irony and triumph. The dynasty that Piye founds, the 25th dynasty of Egypt, will rule for nearly a century. His successors continue his mission. They build temples throughout Egypt and Nubia. They restore old monuments that had fallen into disrepair. They present themselves as the legitimate pharaohs, the true heirs of the great rulers of the past. The most famous of these successors is Taharqa, Piye's nephew, who becomes pharaoh around 690 BCE. Imagine meeting Taharqa at the height of his power. He is tall and commanding, his skin dark, his bearing regal. He wears the double crown with absolute confidence. Around him, scribes record his decrees in perfect hieroglyphs. Priests offer prayers in his name. Foreign ambassadors bring tribute from distant lands. This is not a barbarian pretending to be pharaoh. This is a man who has mastered every aspect of Egyptian kingship, who can quote the ancient texts, who knows the rituals by heart, who builds monuments that rival those of any pharaoh who came before him. Taharqa's reign is a golden age. He builds extensively, adding to temples at Karnak, at Memphis, at Tanis. He constructs a great temple at his capital of Napata. He digs wells in the desert to provide water for travelers and pilgrims. He commissions statues of himself that show him in the classic Egyptian style, but with distinctly African features, making no attempt to hide his Nubian heritage. This is a king who is proud of where he comes from, who sees no contradiction between being Nubian and being pharaoh. Under his rule, the Nile Valley experiences a renaissance, art flourishes. Literature is produced, the temples are filled with worshippers. It is a time of peace and prosperity, a brief golden moment when the dream of unity seems permanent. But outside forces are gathering. To the northeast in Mesopotamia, a new power is rising. The Assyrian Empire, brutal and efficient, is expanding in all directions. Its armies are the most fearsome in the world, equipped with iron weapons, siege engines, and a ruthless willingness to destroy anyone who resists. The Assyrians have conquered Babylon, Syria, and Palestine. Now they turn their attention to Egypt, that ancient prize, rich in gold and grain. Taharqa finds himself facing an enemy, unlike any Kush has encountered before. The Assyrian king Esarhaddon invades Egypt with a massive army. The Kushite forces fight bravely, but they are overwhelmed by Assyrian technology and tactics. Memphis falls. Taharqa is forced to retreat south, back toward Nubia, abandoning the great cities of Lower Egypt that his dynasty had ruled for decades. He attempts a counterattack, retaking Memphis briefly, but the Assyrians return with even greater force. The war drags on, bloody and exhausting. Eventually, Taharqa's successor, Amun, makes one final attempt to hold Egypt, but it ends in disaster. The Assyrians sack Thebes, the sacred city, looting its temples and destroying its monuments in an act of such brutality that it is remembered for centuries. The Kushite dynasty is driven permanently out of Egypt, retreating south of the first cataract, back to the land that gave them birth. The dream of ruling a united Nile Valley is over. The 25th dynasty has ended, but the kingdom of Kush is not finished. It will endure, transform, and find a new identity far to the south. Now, let us step back from the grand sweep of conquest and defeat, and imagine daily life in the kingdom of Kush at its height. You are not a king or a general. You are an ordinary person, living in a small town along the Nile, somewhere between the third and fourth cataracts. Your life is shaped by the rhythm of the river, by the seasons, by the demands of survival in a harsh but beautiful land. The day begins before dawn. The air is cool, almost cold, a relief after the punishing heat of the previous day. You wake on a woven mat in your small mud brick house. The walls are thick, keeping out the worst of the heat during the day and the cold at night. There are no windows, just a small opening near the roof that lets in a shaft of pale morning light and allows the smoke from your cooking fire to escape. Your family is still asleep around you, your spouse, your children, your elderly mother who lives with you because that is the way things are done. You rise quietly, step outside into the narrow street that runs between the houses. The town is beginning to stir. You can hear a baby crying in a nearby house, the soft murmur of voices, the creak of a door opening. A dog trots past, lean and watchful, looking for scraps. You walk toward the river, joining others who have the same idea. Water must be fetched before the day's work begins. At the riverbank, the scene is peaceful. The water is low this time of year, exposing the muddy shore. Women are already there, filling clay jars, balancing them on their heads with a grace that comes from a lifetime of practice. You exchange greetings, quiet words in the Nubian language, a language that is your own, separate from the Egyptian spoken by the priests and officials. There is a sense of community here, a shared understanding of the work that needs to be done, the challenges that must be faced together. You return home with your water jar. Your spouse has started a fire in the small courtyard behind the house. Breakfast is simple. Flatbread made from sorghum flour, a handful of dates, a cup of beer brewed from barley. The beer is weak, more nourishing than intoxicating, something everyone drinks because the water from the river is not always safe. Your children eat quickly, then run off to play with the other children in the street. They will spend the morning chasing each other, playing games with sticks and stones, learning through imitation the skills they will need as adults. Your son will one day work in the fields like you. Your daughter will learn to weave, to grind grain, to manage a household like her mother. Your work today is in the fields. You are a farmer, which means you are part of the vast majority of people in the kingdom. You walk out of the town, following a path that has been worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. The fields stretch along the riverbank, narrow strips of green in a world of brown and gold. This is the growing season, and the crops are doing well. The barley is tall and golden, ready to be harvested soon. The sorghum is still green, but it is growing strong, its stalks thick and healthy. You check the irrigation ditches, making sure the water is flowing properly, that no blockages have formed, that the precious moisture is reaching every plant. This is careful work, essential work. A failed harvest means hunger, perhaps starvation. There is no room for carelessness. The sun climbs higher, the heat becomes oppressive. You work methodically, pausing occasionally to drink from a skin of water you have brought with you. Other farmers are working nearby, and there is a sense of companionship in the shared labor. Sometimes you talk, exchanging news, gossip, complaints about the weather or the tax collectors. Other times you work in silence, each person focused on their own plot, their own responsibilities. Around midday you stop for a rest. You find a patch of shade under a date palm and sit, eating a small meal of bread and onions. The river glints in the distance, its surface shimmering with reflected light. Birds circle overhead, and you can hear the distant sound of children playing near the water. In the afternoon you return to work, but the pace is slower. The heat is at its worst now, and there is no point in exhausting yourself. You work until the sun begins to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Then you gather your tools and walk back to town. The evening is a time for rest and community. People gather in the narrow streets, sitting outside their houses, talking, laughing, watching the children play. Someone has brought out a small drum, and there is music, simple rhythms that have been passed down through generations. Your spouse prepares dinner, a stew made from lentils and vegetables, seasoned with salt and wild herbs. You eat together as a family, the simple pleasure of food after a long day of work. As darkness falls, the town grows quiet. There are no streetlights, no candles burning in every window. People go to sleep early because the day begins early. You lie down on your mat, your body tired but content. Tomorrow will be much the same as today, and the day after that, and the day after that. This is life in the kingdom of Kush for most people, not grand or heroic, but steady, enduring, connected to the land and the river and the rhythms of the natural world. You are not a pharaoh, or a priest, or a warrior. You are a farmer, and your work, unremarkable as it may seem, is what allows the kingdom to exist, to feed its armies, to build its temples, to endure for centuries. You are the foundation upon which everything else rests. But there are others in your town whose lives look different from yours. There is the potter who spends his days at the wheel, shaping clay into vessels of extraordinary beauty. His pottery is decorated with geometric patterns, intricate designs that seem to flow across the curved surface. Some of these pots will be sold in the market, others will be used in religious ceremonies or placed in the tombs of the wealthy. There is the blacksmith, whose workshop is filled with the heat of the forge and the ring of hammer on anvil. He works with iron, a metal that has become increasingly important in the kingdom. Iron tools are stronger than bronze, iron weapons sharper and more durable. The knowledge of ironworking is a closely guarded skill, passed down from master to apprentice, and it gives Kush an advantage in both agriculture and warfare. There is also the weaver, usually a woman, who sits in the shade with her loom, transforming wool and plant fibers into cloth. The textiles she produces are essential for clothing, for bedding, for trade. Some are plain and practical, meant for everyday use. Others are dyed with brilliant colors, reds and blues and yellows, derived from plants and minerals, decorated with woven patterns that signify status and identity. In the market, which takes place once a week, all these goods are bought and sold. Farmers bring their surplus grain, herders bring goats and sheep, traders from distant regions bring exotic goods, frankincense from the south, copper from the mines in the eastern desert, beads made of glass or semi-precious stones. The market is not just a place of commerce, it is a social gathering, a place to meet friends, to hear news, to feel connected to the larger world beyond your small town. The social structure of Kush is clearly defined. At the top is the king, who rules from the capital, whether that is Napata in the north or later Merowe in the south. The king is both a political and religious figure, believed to be chosen by the gods, particularly by Amun. His authority is absolute in theory, though in practice he must work with the powerful priestly class and the nobility who control the land and the armies. Below the king are the priests, who serve in the great temples, performing the daily rituals that ensure the favor of the gods. These men are educated, literate, keepers of sacred knowledge. They write in hieroglyphs and later in the unique Meroitic script. They interpret dreams and omens. They advise the king on matters of state and religion. Their power is immense, and sometimes it rivals that of the king himself. Then there are the warriors, the men who serve in the royal army. Some are professional soldiers, maintained by the state, living in barracks, training daily in the use of bow and spear. Others are called up from the general population in times of war, farmers who set aside their plows and take up weapons. The warrior class is respected and feared. Military success brings wealth and status. Commanders of the army can become powerful nobles, rewarded with land and titles for their service. Below them are the craftsmen, the artisans, the scribes, people with specialized skills that make them valuable to the kingdom. And at the bottom are the farmers and herders, the vast majority of the population whose labor feeds everyone else. Gender roles are clearly defined, but not rigidly so. Women in Kush have more freedom and authority than in many ancient societies. They can own property, inherit wealth, and participate in religious ceremonies. Most importantly, women can wield political power. This becomes especially evident later in Kush's history, with the rise of the cataracts, the queen mothers who rule in their own right. But even in earlier periods, royal women are influential, acting as regents for young kings, managing temple estates, and playing key roles in court politics. Marriage is an important social institution. It is arranged by families, often with an eye to forming alliances or consolidating property. Weddings are celebrated with feasts and music. The bride moves into her husband's household, though she retains ties to her own family. Children are treasured, seen as a blessing from the gods. Infant mortality is high, and every child who survives to adulthood is a cause for celebration. Religious life permeates everything. The gods are not distant abstractions, but real presences who must be honored daily. The most important god is Amun, who dwells at Gebel Barkal and watches over the kingdom. But there are many others, Isis and Osiris, the divine couple associated with fertility and the afterlife. Hathor, the goddess of love and music. Bes, the dwarf god who protects households and children. And then there are the distinctly Nubian deities, gods who have no Egyptian counterpart. Apedamak, the lion-headed war god, fierce and protective. Sebiamaka, a deity associated with fertility and creation. These gods are worshipped in temples and household shrines. Offerings are made, prayers are spoken, festivals are celebrated with processions and sacrifices. Several times a year, major religious festivals bring the entire community together. Imagine attending one of these festivals. It is the feast day of Amun, and people have come from all over the region to participate. The temple courtyard is crowded with worshippers. The air is thick with incense, the smoke rising in blue spirals toward the sky. Priests emerge from the inner sanctum, carrying the sacred bark of Amun, a model boat decorated with gold and precious stones, in which the god is said to reside. They process through the crowd, chanting hymns in a language most people do not fully understand, but which everyone recognizes as sacred. Musicians play drums and sistrums, creating a rhythmic accompaniment. Dancers perform, their movements ritualized and precise. Animals are brought forward to be sacrificed, their blood offered to the god, their meat distributed among the people for a communal feast. This is not just religious observance, it is community affirmation, a reminder of shared identity and shared belief. You stand in the crowd, surrounded by people you know and people you have never met, all of you united in worship of the same god, all of you part of the same kingdom. For a moment, the hierarchies dissolve. King and farmer, priest and potter, all stand together before the divine. The feeling is powerful, almost overwhelming. When the festival ends and you return to your normal life, you carry that feeling with you, a sense of belonging to something larger, something that will endure long after you are gone. Death, when it comes, is not the end. Like the Egyptians, the people of Kush believe in an afterlife, a place where the dead continue to exist, where they need food and drink and tools and companionship. When someone dies, Their body is prepared for burial. The process is simpler for common people, more elaborate for the wealthy and powerful. The body is wrapped in linen, sometimes mummified using techniques learned from Egypt. It is placed in a grave, along with personal possessions, pottery vessels filled with food and beer, jewelry, tools, whatever the person might need in the next world. The grave is marked with a small stone or a modest structure. But for the kings and queens, death is an occasion for monumental architecture. They are buried in pyramids, not the massive smooth-sided pyramids of Giza, but smaller, steeper structures with sharply angled sides. These pyramids are built of stone, faced with plaster, and decorated inside with painted reliefs and inscriptions. The burial chamber is deep underground, accessed by a narrow shaft. The king is laid to rest in a wooden coffin, surrounded by an astonishing array of grave goods, golden jewelry, weapons inlaid with precious stones, fine pottery, bronze vessels, even sacrificed animals. Sometimes in the earlier periods, human attendants are sacrificed to accompany the king, though this practice declines over time. These pyramids are built in vast necropolises, cities of the dead, where generations of rulers lie side by side. Their monuments are testament to the kingdom's endurance and power. After the loss of Egypt to the Assyrians, the kingdom of Kush retreated southward. The capital remained at Napata for a time, but the kingdom was changing, adapting, looking for new sources of strength. Around 590 BCE, a momentous decision was made. The capital would be moved even further south, away from the constant threat of invasion from Egypt, to a city called Meroe. Imagine traveling to this new capital for the first time. You leave Napata, passing through the stark beauty of the desert, the river always on your left, winding through the landscape like a silver thread. Days pass. The landscape begins to change. The desert becomes less dominant. There is more rain here, more vegetation. Trees grow along the river banks. The air feels different, heavier with moisture. And then you see it rising from the plain, the city of Meroe. Meroe is different from Napata in almost every way. It is built in a region with significantly more rainfall, which means agriculture is less dependent on the unpredictable flooding of the Nile. The land around the city is more fertile, more forgiving. But the most important difference is what lies beneath the ground. The region around Meroe contains rich deposits of iron ore. This is a resource that will transform the kingdom, making it a center of iron production, a technology that is still relatively new in Africa. The ability to mine and smelt iron gives Meroe economic and military advantages. Iron tools make farming more efficient. Iron weapons make armies more formidable, and the trade in iron goods brings wealth from across the ancient world. As you enter the city, you are struck by its grandeur. The streets are wide and well planned. The buildings are made of mud brick and stone, many of them decorated with colorful plaster. There are workshops everywhere, the sounds of industry filling the air. The ring of hammers on anvils echoes from the metalworking quarter, where blacksmiths labor over their forges, transforming raw ore into tools and weapons. The air smells of smoke and heated metal. In another part of the city, potters work at their wheels, creating vessels that are distinctly Meroitic in style, decorated with patterns and motifs that are unique to this culture. There are weavers, leather workers, jewelers, all practicing their crafts, all contributing to the city's prosperity. At the heart of Meroe is the royal palace, a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by high walls. This is where the king resides, where the business of state is conducted, where foreign ambassadors are received and tribute is collected. The palace is decorated with reliefs carved into the walls, showing scenes of conquest, religious rituals, and royal processions. These images are not in the Egyptian style, at least not entirely. They are something new, something distinctly Meroitic. The figures are rendered with an attention to detail that is different from Egyptian art. The clothing and jewelry depicted are unique to Kush. This is a visual language that proclaims the kingdom's independence and distinct identity. Near the palace is the great temple of Amun, the most important religious structure in the city. But there are also temples to other gods, including Apedemak, the lion-headed war deity who becomes increasingly prominent in Meroitic religion. One of these temples is particularly striking. Its walls are covered with relief carvings showing Apedemak in his full glory, a massive figure with a lion's head and a man's body, holding weapons, radiating power and ferocity. This is a god who is not Egyptian. who has no counterpart in the Egyptian pantheon. He is purely African, purely Kushite, a symbol of the kingdom's growing independence from Egyptian cultural dominance. Perhaps the most significant change in Meroe is linguistic. For centuries, the official written language of Kush has been Egyptian, written in hieroglyphs. Scribes have been trained in this system, and all important documents have been recorded in this way. But around 300 BCE, something remarkable happens. The Kushites develop their own script, a writing system that is used to record their own language, which is not Egyptian but something distinctly Nubian. This script, called Meroitic, comes in two forms. One is based on Egyptian hieroglyphs, but simplified and adapted. The other is a cursive script, faster to write, used for everyday documents. The language itself is a mystery. Although we can read the script, we cannot fully understand the language because it is unrelated to any known language today. The inscriptions remain frustratingly opaque, tantalizingly close to being understood but still locked in their ancient silence. The existence of this script is profoundly important. It represents a declaration of cultural independence. The Kushites are saying, in effect, that they are not Egyptians, that they have their own language, their own identity, their own way of recording their history and their beliefs. The temples at Meroe are covered with inscriptions in this script. Royal decrees, religious texts, and tomb epitaphs are all written in Meroitic. For the people of Meroe, this is their language, and to see it written on the walls of temples and palaces is a source of pride and identity. The city is also a center of trade. Meroe sits at the intersection of multiple trade routes. Caravans arrive from the south, bringing ivory, ebony, leopard skins and enslaved people captured in raids. From the east come goods from the Red Sea coast, frankincense, myrrh, and items from the distant lands of Arabia and India. From the north come products of the Mediterranean world, fine pottery, wine, olive oil and luxury goods desired by the Kushite elite. Meroe acts as a hub, a place where these diverse trade networks meet and exchange. The wealth generated by this trade is immense, and it funds the construction of temples, palaces, and pyramids that dot the landscape around the city. The pyramids of Meroe are among the most striking features of the landscape. They are built in a vast necropolis to the east of the city, a field of stone monuments rising from the sand. These pyramids are smaller than the Great Pyramids of Egypt, but there are more of them, over 200 in total. They are steep-sided, with sharp angles, and they are built of local sandstone, which gives them a golden color in the sunlight. Each pyramid is the tomb of a king or queen, a testament to their power and their belief in the afterlife. The interior of each pyramid is decorated with painted reliefs showing the deceased ruler being welcomed by the gods, offering gifts, participating in the rituals that will ensure their safe passage to the next world. Standing among these pyramids, you can feel the weight of history. These are not recent constructions. Some of them are hundreds of years old, built by rulers whose names are now lost to time. Others are new, their plaster still fresh, their inscriptions still sharp and clear. This is the royal cemetery of Meroe, a place where the rulers of Kush have been laid to rest for generations, and where they will continue to be buried for centuries to come. It is a monument to endurance, to the continuity of a kingdom that has survived conquest, defeat, and transformation, and that now stands as a power in its own right, distinct from Egypt, distinct from any other African kingdom, uniquely itself. One of the most remarkable aspects of the kingdom of Kush, especially in the Meroitic period, is the prominence of women in positions of power. In many ancient societies, women are relegated to domestic roles, excluded from political authority and military command. But in Kush, this is not the case. Women can be rulers, not just as regents for young kings, but as sovereigns in their own right. They are given the title Kandeke, a word that means queen mother or queen, and they wield real power, commanding armies, building temples, conducting diplomacy with foreign powers. These are not ceremonial figures, they are leaders, and their presence in the historical record is a testament to a culture that valued female authority in ways that were unusual for the ancient world. The most famous of these warrior queens is Amun, who ruled around 40 BCE. Imagine her court, a place where power is wielded with absolute confidence. She sits on a throne in the great hall of the palace at Meroe, surrounded by advisors and generals. She is older, perhaps in her 50s, and her face bears the marks of a hard life. One of her eyes is gone, lost in battle, and she wears the scar with pride. She is dressed in the royal regalia, a pleated robe, heavy jewelry of gold and carnelian, a crown that proclaims her status as ruler. Her voice, when she speaks, is commanding, and no one in the room doubts that she is in charge. This is a woman who has led armies, who has faced down the greatest military power of the age, and who has emerged, if not victorious, then at least undefeated. The story of Amun is bound up with the expansion of Rome. After the death of Cleopatra and the annexation of Egypt by Octavian, who would soon become the Emperor Augustus, Rome turned its attention to the lands south of Egypt. Nubia, with its gold mines and its strategic position, was too tempting to ignore. Roman forces moved south, occupying towns along the Nile, asserting Roman authority over what had been Kushite territory. The Kushites, led by Amun, did not accept this quietly. In 25 BCE, she launched a bold counterattack. Her armies swept north, raiding Roman-held towns, capturing prisoners, and even toppling statues of Augustus, a symbolic act of defiance. One of these bronze heads, torn from a statue of the emperor, was brought back to Meroe and buried beneath the steps of a temple, so that everyone entering the temple would walk over the defeated face of Rome. The Romans responded with overwhelming force. A Roman army led by the prefect Petronius marched south, recaptured the lost territory, and pushed deep into Nubia. They laid siege to Napata, the old capital, and destroyed it, burning temples and palaces, a brutal demonstration of Roman power. But the Kushites did not surrender. Amun retreated further south and continued to resist. The war dragged on, neither side able to achieve a decisive victory. The Romans found that campaigning in Nubia was difficult and expensive. The heat was punishing. Supply lines were stretched thin. The Kushite forces used guerrilla tactics, striking swiftly and then melting back into the desert. Eventually, pragmatism prevailed. Amun sent envoys to the island of Samos, where Augustus was residing, to negotiate a peace treaty. The negotiations were successful. The terms were surprisingly favorable to Kush. The Romans withdrew from much of the territory they had occupied. The border was established at the first cataract, where it had been before the conflict began. Kush retained its independence and was even exempted from paying tribute to Rome, a concession that acknowledged the kingdom's strength and the difficulty of conquering it. Amun had achieved what few rulers of her time could claim. She had fought Rome and forced them to negotiate. She had defended her kingdom's sovereignty, and she had done so with one eye, leading from the front, a warrior queen whose legend would endure for centuries. Amun was not the only powerful Kandake. There were others, women whose names appear on temple walls and funerary inscriptions, who built monuments and ruled with authority. One of these is Amun, who ruled around 10 BCE. Her pyramid tomb, when it was excavated in the 19th century, was found to contain an astonishing treasure: gold jewelry of exquisite craftsmanship, rings, bracelets, necklaces, all decorated with intricate designs and set with precious stones. This was not the tomb of a figurehead. This was the burial of a ruler who commanded immense wealth and who was honored in death as she had been in life. The reliefs on her pyramid chapel show her in full regalia, tall and imposing, holding weapons, smiting enemies, performing rituals. She is depicted in the same powerful, commanding manner as any male king, making it clear that her authority was absolute. Why did Kush allow women to rule in this way? The answer is complex and not entirely clear, but several factors likely contributed. The matrilineal aspects of royal succession, where kingship passed through the female line, gave women a central role in legitimizing power. The importance of the queen mother in court politics meant that women were already involved in governance and decision-making, and there was a cultural acceptance, perhaps rooted in indigenous African traditions, that authority was not inherently male, that a woman could lead, command, and rule just as effectively as a man. This was a radical idea in the ancient world, and it set Kush apart from its neighbors, a kingdom where gender was not an absolute barrier to power. The Kandakes were warriors, but they were also builders and patrons of religion. They commissioned temples, restored old monuments, and performed the rituals that connected the kingdom to the divine. In the reliefs that decorate the temples at Meroe and other sites, you can see them standing before the gods, making offerings, receiving blessings. They are shown with the same divine authority as male rulers, equal partners in the sacred contract between the kingdom and the supernatural. This visual language reinforces their legitimacy, making it clear that their power comes not just from military might or political maneuvering, but from the favor of the gods themselves. To encounter one of these queens in her prime would have been an awe-inspiring experience. Imagine standing in the throne room as a Manishake to receive a foreign ambassador. She is seated on a throne carved from wood and inlaid with ivory. Her attendants stand behind her, silent and watchful. She wears a robe of fine linen, dyed a deep indigo blue, a color reserved for royalty. Around her neck hang multiple strands of gold beads, and her wrists are adorned with heavy bracelets. On her head is a crown, not the simple circlet of earlier Kushite rulers, but an elaborate headdress decorated with symbols of the gods, cobras and sun discs and feathers. Her expression is stern, her gaze penetrating. When she speaks, her words are measured and authoritative. This is a woman who has ruled for decades, who has made decisions that shaped the fate of thousands, who will be remembered long after her death as one of the great rulers of Kush. The legacy of the Kandakes extends beyond their individual reigns. They set a precedent, demonstrating that female rule was not just possible but could be successful and enduring. Their presence in the historical record challenges modern assumptions about gender and power in the ancient world. They remind us that history is more complex and diverse than it is often portrayed, that there were societies where women held power, commanded respect, and left their mark on the world in ways that are still visible today in the ruins of their palaces, the reliefs on their temple walls, and the pyramids that mark their final resting places. Religion in the kingdom of Kush is not a separate sphere of life, something practiced only in temples or on special occasions. It permeates everything, shaping the rhythm of daily existence, informing political decisions, providing meaning and structure to the universe. The gods are real and present, not abstract concepts, but living forces that must be honored, appeased, and consulted. To understand Kush, you must understand its religion, the complex web of beliefs and practices that bound the kingdom together and connected it to something larger than itself. At the center of this religious world is Amun, the king of gods. His presence is felt everywhere, but especially at Gebel Barkal, that sacred mountain near Napata, where he is said to dwell. The temple at the base of this mountain is one of the most important in the entire kingdom, a place of pilgrimage, a site where kings are crowned, and where the most important rituals are performed. Imagine entering this temple for the first time. You pass through massive stone gates, walking into a courtyard, surrounded by columns carved with hieroglyphs. The air is heavy with incense, a sweet, intoxicating smell that seems to fill your lungs and cloud your thoughts. Ahead of you, the inner sanctum beckons, a dark chamber where only priests are allowed, where the statue of Amun resides, hidden from ordinary eyes, mysterious and powerful. The priests of Amun are a powerful class. They are educated men, trained in the rituals and the sacred texts, keepers of knowledge that ordinary people can never access. They conduct the daily rituals that maintain cosmic order, making offerings to the god, reciting prayers, ensuring that Amun remains favorable to the kingdom. They also wield political power. The priests of Amun have the authority to legitimize kings, to proclaim who is fit to rule, and in some cases to remove kings who have lost divine favor. This makes them both essential and dangerous, partners with the monarchy but also potential rivals. A king who alienates the priesthood risks losing everything, not just political support, but the claim to divine legitimacy that is the foundation of royal authority. But Amun is not alone. There are other gods, many of them borrowed from Egypt but transformed in the Kushite context. Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood, is widely worshipped, especially by women. She is seen as a protector, a source of comfort in times of trouble. Osiris, her husband, god of the dead and ruler of the underworld, presides over the journey to the afterlife. Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and joy, is celebrated in festivals where music and dance are offered in her honor. Bes, the dwarf god, protects households and wards off evil spirits. His image is carved on amulets and painted on walls, a friendly, fierce presence that watches over daily life. And then there are the gods who are distinctly Kushite, who have no Egyptian origin. The most important of these is Apedamak, the lion-headed war god. He is fierce, powerful, and uniquely African. His cult grows in importance during the Meroitic period, and temples dedicated to him are built throughout the kingdom. One of the most impressive is at Musalwa at As-Sufra, a sprawling temple complex in the desert. The walls are covered with reliefs showing a pedomac in various forms, sometimes with 3 heads, sometimes surrounded by captives, always radiating power and menace. To stand before these images is to feel a connection to something primal, something that predates Egyptian influence, something rooted deep in African tradition. Another uniquely Kushite deity is Sibia Mecca, a creator god associated with fertility and the natural world. He is depicted with wings and a lion's body, a synthesis of different forms, representing the generative power of the universe. Worship of Sibia Mecca involves rituals that celebrate the fertility of the land, the abundance of the harvest, the continuation of life. These are not abstract theological concepts. They are practical concerns, matters of survival in a land where the line between plenty and famine is always thin. Religious festivals punctuate the year, providing structure and meaning to the passage of time. These are communal events, drawing people from across the kingdom to participate in rituals that renew the connection between the human and divine worlds. One of the most important is the coronation ceremony, when a new king is installed. This takes place at Gebel Barkal, in the presence of Amun. The king-to-be undergoes purification rituals, washing away his former identity. He is then led into the temple, where the priests perform secret rites, anointing him with sacred oils, placing the crown on his head, proclaiming him the chosen of Amun. When he emerges, he is no longer just a man. He is a divine figure, a living embodiment of the god's will, a bridge between heaven and earth. Other festivals celebrate the agricultural cycle. There is the festival of the inundation, when the Nile begins to flood, a time of thanksgiving for the life-giving water that makes farming possible. There is the harvest festival, when the first fruits are offered to the gods in gratitude. There are festivals dedicated to individual deities, processions where their statues are carried through the streets, accompanied by music, dancing, and feasting. These festivals are not just religious observances, they are social occasions, times when the normal hierarchies relax, when everyone, from the highest noble to the humblest farmer, participates in shared rituals and shared joy. Death, as we have seen, is not the end, but a transition. The Kushites, like the Egyptians, believe in an afterlife, a realm where the dead continue to exist, where they need sustenance and companionship. The preparation of the body for burial is a sacred act. The body is washed, anointed with oils, and wrapped in linen. For the wealthy, mummification is performed, preserving the body so that the soul can recognize it in the afterlife. The body is then placed in a coffin, along with grave goods, everything the person might need in the next world. Food and drink are placed in pottery vessels. Tools and weapons are included. Jewelry and amulets provide protection against the dangers of the underworld. The funeral itself is a somber but important ritual. The body is carried in procession to the tomb, accompanied by mourners who wail and tear their clothing in grief. Priests chant prayers, invoking the gods to welcome the deceased. At the tomb, final offerings are made, and the body is sealed inside. For kings and queens, the tomb is a pyramid, a monumental structure that will stand for millennia. For ordinary people, the grave is simpler, marked by a small stone, but the rituals are the same, the belief in the afterlife universal. Everyone, regardless of status, will make the journey to the realm of the dead, and everyone needs the proper preparations to arrive safely. Religion also extends to the natural world. Certain animals are considered sacred, manifestations of divine power. The ram is associated with Amun, and rams are kept at the temple at Gebel Barkal, cared for by priests, honored in death with elaborate burials. Lions, fierce and majestic, are associated with royalty and with a pedomac. Elephants, powerful and intelligent, are seen as symbols of strength. These animals are not just symbols, they are believed to contain a spark of the divine, and to harm them without proper ritual, justification is a sacrilege. The oracle plays a crucial role in decision-making. When a king faces a difficult choice, when a community is threatened by drought or disease, when the future is uncertain, the oracle is consulted. This is a ritual performed by priests, who enter a trance state and speak with the voice of the god. The words are interpreted, signs are read, and decisions are made based on divine guidance. This is not superstition in the modern sense. It is a profound belief that the gods are active in the world, that they care about human affairs, and that they will provide guidance to those who ask with sincerity and humility. To live in the kingdom of Kush is to live in a world where the sacred and the mundane are inseparable, where every action has religious significance, where the gods are not distant but intimately involved in daily life. The temples are not just buildings, they are the dwelling places of the gods, portals between the human and divine realms. The rituals are not just traditions, they are essential acts that maintain the order of the universe, that ensure the continued favor of the gods, that protect the kingdom from chaos and destruction. This is a worldview that we in the modern age can barely comprehend, but it is the lens through which the people of Kush understood their existence, and it shaped everything they did, from the food they ate, to the wars they fought, to the monuments they built. The wealth of the kingdom of Kush is built on trade, on the movement of goods across vast distances, on the kingdom's position as a middleman between the interior of Africa and the markets of the Mediterranean world. Meroe is a hub, a place where caravans converge, where merchants from different regions meet, where exotic goods are exchanged for gold and iron and the products of Kushite craftsmen. To understand the prosperity of Kush, you must understand these trade networks, the routes that stretched across deserts and along rivers, the goods that moved and the wealth they generated. The most important trade good is gold. The deserts east of the Nile contain rich deposits, veins of the precious metal running through the dark stone. Mining this gold is dangerous, difficult work. Imagine being a miner, working in one of these remote desert outposts. You wake before dawn, when the air is still cool, and make your way to the mine entrance, a narrow shaft cut into the rock face. You descend into darkness, carrying a small oil lamp that provides barely enough light to see by. The air underground is stifling, thick with dust. You work with simple tools, a hammer and chisel, breaking away the rock bit by bit, searching for the telltale glitter of gold. The work is exhausting, and the heat is oppressive. Water must be brought from distant wells, carried on the backs of donkeys across miles of barren wasteland. When enough ore has been extracted, it is transported to processing sites where it is crushed and washed, separating the gold from the worthless rock. This is skilled work, performed by specialists who know the techniques passed down through generations. The gold dust is then smelted in small furnaces, heated until it melts, poured into molds to form ingots. These ingots are transported to Meroe, where they are worked by skilled goldsmiths into jewelry, ornaments, and ceremonial objects. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Necklaces of intricate design, bracelets with detailed engravings, rings set with semi-precious stones like carnelian and lapis lazuli. These items are worn by the elite, symbols of wealth and status, but they are also trade goods exported to Egypt and beyond, where they command high prices. Ivory is another crucial trade good. It comes from the elephants that roam the savannas south of Meroe. Hunting these animals is dangerous work, requiring skill and courage. The ivory is transported by caravan to Meroe, where it is carved by master craftsmen into furniture, decorative objects, and small figurines. Egyptian and later Roman merchants prize Kushite ivory for its quality, and it becomes a major export, generating significant wealth for the kingdom. Ebony wood, dark and dense, is also harvested from the forests to the south. It is used for furniture and luxury items, valued for its beauty and rarity. Iron is perhaps the most important resource of the Meroitic period. The region around Meroe contains abundant iron ore, and the Kushites developed sophisticated techniques for smelting and working this metal. The landscape around the city is dotted with slag heaps, the waste product of iron production, so large that they are visible from miles away. Iron tools make agriculture more efficient, allowing farmers to clear more land and cultivate it more effectively. Iron weapons give Kushite armies an advantage over enemies who still rely on bronze. And iron goods become a major export, traded north to Egypt and south into the African interior. The trade routes themselves are lifelines, connecting Meroe to the wider world. To the north, the Nile provides a natural highway, boats carrying goods downstream to Egypt, and returning laden with Mediterranean products. To the east, trade routes cross the desert to the Red Sea coast, where Kushite merchants trade with Arabian and Indian merchants, exchanging African goods for spices, textiles, and other luxury items. To the south, caravans follow ancient paths into the interior of Africa, bringing back leopard skins, feathers, and enslaved people captured in raids on neighboring communities. And to the west, routes cross the desert to other African kingdoms, creating a network of exchange that spans the continent. The marketplace at Meroe is a sensory overload, a place where cultures collide and commerce thrives. Imagine walking through it on a busy day. The narrow lanes are crowded with people, merchants calling out their wares, buyers haggling over prices, porters carrying heavy loads on their backs or balancing them on their heads. The smell is overwhelming, a mix of spices, animals, sweat and cooking food. There are stalls selling grain, sorghum and barley piled high in woven baskets. There are vendors offering fresh dates, their sweetness attracting flies. There are butchers with cuts of meat hanging from hooks, the blood dripping onto the dusty ground. And there are the luxury goods, fine pottery from Egypt, glass beads from the Mediterranean, bolts of colorful cloth from distant lands. Foreign merchants are a common sight, Greeks and Romans who have traveled up the Nile or across the desert, seeking the exotic products of Africa. They stand out, dressed in their foreign clothes, speaking languages that sound strange to Kushite ears, but they are welcomed because they bring wealth. They pay in silver and gold, in goods that the Kushites desire, and they take back with them stories of Meroe, tales of a rich and powerful kingdom deep in Africa, a place of golden jewelry and skilled craftsmen, of warrior queens and ancient temples. These stories spread, and Kush becomes known, not well known, not famous like Egypt or Rome, but known enough that merchants are willing to undertake the dangerous journey to trade there. The wealth generated by this trade is immense. It funds the construction of the royal palaces, the great temples, and the pyramids that dot the landscape. It supports a large class of artisans and craftsmen who produce the goods that make the kingdom famous. It allows the maintenance of a professional army that defends the kingdom's borders and projects power into neighboring regions. It enables the patronage of religious institutions, the support of the priesthood, the performance of the elaborate rituals that maintain cosmic order. Without trade, the kingdom of Kush would be just another small agricultural society, struggling to survive in a harsh environment. With trade, it becomes an empire, a center of power and culture, a kingdom that endures for more than 1,000 years. But trade is also a vulnerability. The routes can be disrupted by war, by the rise of rival powers, by changes in the political landscape. The demand for Kushite goods can decline if other sources become available or if tastes change. And the wealth generated by trade can create inequality, concentrating power in the hands of a small elite, while the majority of the population remains poor. These tensions exist beneath the surface, invisible most of the time but always present, waiting for the right circumstances to erupt into crisis. And as the centuries pass, those circumstances will arrive, and the prosperity of Kush will be tested in ways that will ultimately prove beyond its ability to withstand. For now, though, the kingdom is at its height. The markets are busy, the caravans come and go, the wealth flows into Meroe like a river of gold. The pyramids rise from the sand, monuments to the power and ambition of the Kushite kings and queens. The temples echo with the chants of priests. The workshops ring with the sound of hammers on anvils. This is the golden age of Kush, a time that will be remembered long after the kingdom itself has fallen, a time when Africa's forgotten empire was one of the most prosperous and powerful states in the ancient world. Nothing lasts forever. Empires rise and fall, kingdoms flourish and fade, and the kingdom of Kush, for all its wealth and power, is no exception. The decline, when it comes, is not sudden. There is no single catastrophic event, no decisive battle that marks the end. Instead, it is a slow erosion, a gradual weakening, a series of setbacks and losses that accumulate over centuries until the kingdom that once conquered Egypt is reduced to a shadow of its former self. The story of this decline is as important as the story of the rise, a reminder of the fragility of human achievement, of the ways that external pressures and internal weaknesses can combine to bring even the mightiest powers to ruin. The first signs of trouble appear in the environment itself. The climate begins to change, subtly at first, but with increasing severity over time. The rains become less reliable. The Nile floods, which have sustained agriculture for millennia, become more erratic. Some years the flood is too low, leaving the fields dry and barren. Other years it is too high, washing away crops and destroying irrigation systems. The delicate balance between desert and farmland begins to shift. The desert encroaches, swallowing land that was once fertile, turning villages into ruins, forcing people to abandon their homes and migrate to areas where water is still available. This process, known as desertification, is driven by a combination of factors, natural climate cycles and human activities like overgrazing and deforestation. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. The agricultural base of the kingdom is weakening, and with it, the ability to support a large population and a powerful state. Trade routes, which have been the lifeblood of Meroe, also begin to falter. To the southeast, a new power is rising, the kingdom of Aksum, centered in what is now Ethiopia. Aksum is strategically positioned to control the trade routes connecting the interior of Africa to the Red Sea coast. It has access to its own gold mines and ivory sources, and it begins to compete directly with Kush for control of these lucrative trade networks. Aksumite merchants offer alternatives to Kushite goods, and foreign traders begin to bypass Meroe, traveling instead to Aksum's ports. The wealth that has sustained the kingdom for centuries begins to dry up. The caravans come less frequently, the markets are less busy, the revenues that once funded temple construction and military campaigns diminish, and the state finds itself with fewer resources to address the challenges it faces. There are also military pressures. The nomadic tribes of the desert, always a potential threat, become more aggressive. They raid settlements along the borders, stealing livestock, attacking caravans, disrupting the trade routes. The Kushite army, once feared throughout the region, finds it increasingly difficult to defend such a vast territory. The iron weapons that once gave them an advantage are now common among their enemies. The discipline and organization that characterized the military in earlier centuries has eroded. Soldiers are less well trained, less well equipped, less motivated. The state cannot afford to pay them adequately, and loyalty becomes a question. Some units defect, others simply refuse to fight. The borders, once secure, become porous, and the sense of safety that has characterized life in Kush for generations begins to evaporate. Internal political instability adds to the problems. The succession of kings becomes contested. Rival factions within the nobility compete for power, each supporting their own candidate. The priesthood, once a stabilizing force, becomes a source of division, with different temples backing different claimants. Civil conflicts erupt, small wars fought between competing dynasties. These conflicts drain resources, damage infrastructure, and create an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. The unity that has been the kingdom's strength begins to fracture, and the state becomes less able to respond effectively to external threats. By the 3rd century CE, the situation is dire. Meroe is still standing, still inhabited, but it is a shadow of what it once was. The population has declined. Many of the grand buildings are falling into disrepair. The temples, once centers of religious and political power, are neglected. The pyramids are still being built, but they are smaller, less elaborate, a reflection of the kingdom's diminished wealth. The last inscriptions in the Meroitic script are carved, documenting the final kings and queens, their names recorded for posterity even as their power slips away. And then, around 350 CE, something happens. The details are murky, lost to history, but the result is clear. Meroe is abandoned. The city that has been the capital for centuries, the center of Kushite power and culture, is simply left behind. The royal family, the nobility, the priests, the craftsmen, all depart. Some move to smaller settlements upriver. Others disappear from the historical record entirely. The pyramids stand empty, their burial chambers looted by treasure hunters. The temples fall silent, their rituals no longer performed. The workshops are deserted, their tools left to rust. Meroe becomes a ghost city, its streets filled with blowing sand, its buildings slowly crumbling under the relentless assault of wind and time. What caused this final collapse? Historians have debated this question for over a century. One theory is that Aksum invaded, conquering Meroe and forcing the population to flee. There is some evidence for this. Aksumite inscriptions mention a campaign against the Nubians, and the timing roughly corresponds with the abandonment of Meroe. But there is no archaeological evidence of a violent destruction, no burned buildings, no mass graves, no signs of a catastrophic battle. Another theory is that environmental collapse made the city uninhabitable. If the Nile floods failed for several years in a row, if the wells dried up, if the desert advanced to the very walls of the city, then the population might have had no choice but to leave, seeking survival elsewhere. Yet another theory is that political fragmentation simply made centralized rule impossible. If the kingdom had already broken into smaller competing states, if the authority of the king had eroded to the point of irrelevance, then Meroe as a capital might have lost its function, and the elite might have dispersed to rule their own smaller domains. The truth is probably some combination of these factors: environmental stress, economic decline, military pressure, political instability, and possibly an Exumite invasion, all coming together in a perfect storm that the kingdom could not survive. What is certain is that by 350 CE, the kingdom of Kush as a unified political entity has ceased to exist. The great civilization that once ruled from the Mediterranean to the heart of Africa, that built pyramids and temples, that produced warrior queens and skilled craftsmen, that held its own against Rome, is gone. The name Kush fades from the historical record. The Meroitic script falls out of use, its meaning forgotten. The royal line ends or at least disappears from recorded history. The kingdom becomes a memory, and eventually, even the memory fades. In the centuries that follow, smaller kingdoms emerge in the region, successor states that carry some elements of Kushite culture but lack its power and scope. The Christian kingdoms of Nubia will rise in the medieval period, building churches where temples once stood, adopting new beliefs but retaining some of the old traditions. And eventually even these will fall, conquered by Arab invaders, absorbed into the Islamic world. The land that was once Kush becomes a backwater, a place where ancient ruins stand as silent witnesses to a glory that is almost entirely forgotten. But the ruins endure. The pyramids, though battered by time and plunder, still rise from the sand at Meroe and other sites. The temples, though crumbling, still bear their inscriptions in Meroitic script, a language that we can read but cannot fully understand. The artifacts, jewelry and pottery and tools, sit in museums around the world, beautiful and enigmatic, testimonies to a culture that was sophisticated, wealthy, and powerful. And slowly, over the past century, archaeologists and historians have begun to piece together the story, to bring the kingdom of Kush out of obscurity and into the light, to give it the recognition it deserves as one of Africa's great civilizations. The rediscovery of Kush is a story in itself, a tale of exploration, archaeology, and the slow piecing together of a lost history. For centuries after the kingdom's fall, Kush existed only in fragments, brief mentions in ancient texts, ruins half buried in the sand, a name that appeared occasionally in Egyptian inscriptions or Greek geographical treatises. Most people in the modern world had never heard of it. Even scholars of ancient history focused their attention on Egypt, on Greece, on Rome, on the civilizations that had left abundant written records and monumental architecture. Kush was a footnote, if it was mentioned at all. The first European explorers to venture into Nubia in the 18th and 19th centuries were struck by what they found. Traveling up the Nile beyond Egypt, they encountered vast fields of pyramids, smaller than the famous structures at Giza, but far more numerous. They saw temple ruins covered in inscriptions in an unknown script. They heard stories from local people about ancient kings and queens, about cities that had once been great but now lay in ruins. These early travelers wrote accounts of their journeys, illustrated with drawings of the pyramids and temples, and these accounts began to attract attention in Europe. Here was evidence of a civilization that had been completely forgotten, an African kingdom that had built monuments comparable to those of Egypt. One of the most infamous figures in this early period of exploration is Giuseppe Ferlini, an Italian adventurer and treasure hunter who arrived in Sudan in the 1830s. Ferlini was not an archaeologist. He was a looter, driven by greed rather than scholarly interest. He focused his attention on the pyramids at Meroe, convinced that they contained treasure. His method was brutally simple. He would dynamite the top off a pyramid, exposing the interior, and then search the rubble for valuables. In one pyramid, he struck gold, literally. He found the tomb of Queen Amenhotep, and it was filled with an astonishing hoard of gold jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, rings, all of exquisite craftsmanship. Ferlini took everything, destroying the tomb in the process, obliterating any archaeological context that might have helped scholars understand the burial practices and beliefs of the Kushites. Ferlini tried to sell his treasure in Europe, but he was met with skepticism. The jewelry was so beautiful, so sophisticated, that many scholars refused to believe it came from Africa. They accused Ferlini of faking it, or of stealing it from somewhere else. It was a reflection of the racist attitudes of the time, the assumption that Africans were incapable of producing such refined art. Eventually, some of the jewelry ended up in museums in Munich and Berlin, where it remains today, a testament to both Kushite craftsmanship and the destructive legacy of early treasure hunting. Fellini's actions also set a terrible precedent. Other looters followed, blowing up pyramids, plundering tombs, destroying irreplaceable evidence in their search for gold. But not all early explorers were looters. Some were genuine scholars, driven by curiosity and a desire to understand the past. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, systematic archaeological excavations began at sites throughout Nubia. British, French, German, and later American and Sudanese archaeologists worked methodically, carefully excavating tombs, temples, and cities, recording their findings and publishing detailed reports. These excavations revealed the extent and sophistication of Kushite civilization. They uncovered evidence of complex trade networks, skilled metalworking, elaborate religious practices, and a political system that had endured for over 1,000 years. One of the key challenges was deciphering the Meroitic script. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, which had been decoded in the early 19th century thanks to the Rosetta Stone, the Meroitic script remained a mystery. Scholars could identify the individual signs and could determine that the script represented sounds rather than ideas, making it an alphabetic or syllabic writing system. They could even read the signs, pronouncing the words, but they could not understand the language itself because it was unrelated to any known language. This remains true today. We can read Meroitic inscriptions aloud, but we do not fully understand what they say. It is one of the great unsolved mysteries of archaeology, a tantalizing glimpse into a lost world that remains frustratingly out of reach. Despite this limitation, the archaeological evidence has allowed scholars to reconstruct much of Kushite history. The pyramids, with their inscriptions and burial goods, tell us about the kings and queens who ruled. The temples, with their reliefs and ritual objects, tell us about religious beliefs and practices. The cities, with their workshops and houses, tell us about daily life, about what people ate and wore, about how they made their living. The artifacts, pottery, jewelry, tools, weapons, tell us about trade, about craftsmanship, about the connections between Kush and the wider world. Slowly, painstakingly, a picture has emerged of a civilization that was rich, complex, and enduring. In recent decades, there has been a growing recognition of Kush's importance. UNESCO has designated several Kushite sites as World Heritage Sites, acknowledging their significance to human history. The pyramids at Meroe, the temples at Musawwarat Sufra and Naka, the ruins of Kerma, all are now protected and studied by archaeologists from around the world. The Sudanese government has invested in preserving these sites and promoting them as tourist destinations. Museums in Sudan display Kushite artifacts, educating both locals and visitors about this forgotten empire. Yet Kush remains less famous than Egypt, less studied, less known. Part of this is due to the accidents of history. Egypt had continuous contact with the Mediterranean world, with Greece and Rome, and its history was recorded by ancient historians whose works survived. Kush, by contrast, was more isolated, its contacts with the Mediterranean world less frequent, and it left fewer written records that outsiders could understand. Part of it is also due to the biases of modern scholarship. For too long, African history was marginalized, seen as less important, less worthy of study than European or Middle Eastern history. Kush, being African, was ignored or dismissed, its achievements attributed to Egyptian influence rather than recognized as the product of an indigenous African civilization. But this is changing. Scholars are increasingly recognizing that Kush was not simply a copy of Egypt. It was its own civilization, with its own language, its own gods, its own political system, its own artistic traditions. Yes, it was influenced by Egypt, but influence is not the same as dependence. The Kushites took what they found useful from Egyptian culture and adapted it, transformed it, made it their own, and they contributed their own innovations, their iron technology, their unique script, their institution of female rule. They built an empire that lasted longer than many better-known civilizations. They ruled Egypt itself for nearly a century. They fought Rome to a standstill. They created art and architecture of lasting beauty. They deserve to be remembered, to be studied, to be celebrated as one of Africa's great civilizations. Today, if you travel to Sudan, you can visit these sites yourself. You can stand among the pyramids at Meroe, more than 200 of them stretching across the desert, their sharp angles cutting against the endless blue sky. You can walk through the temple complexes at Musawarat-es Sufra and Naka, running your fingers over the stone reliefs, marveling at the images of lion-headed Apetamak and the warrior queens who ruled this land. You can visit the museum in Khartoum, where the gold jewelry of Amanishakheto and other Kushite treasures are displayed, shimmering under glass, as beautiful now as they were 2,000 years ago. And if you close your eyes and listen, you can almost hear the echoes of that lost world, the chanting of priests in the temples, the ring of hammers in the workshops, the distant sound of drums accompanying a royal procession. The legacy of Kush is not just in these physical remains. It is also in the cultural continuity of the Nubian people who still live in the region today. They speak modern Nubian languages, descendants of the ancient tongues. They maintain traditions that stretch back centuries, perhaps even millennia. They are proud of their heritage, of the knowledge that their ancestors built pyramids and temples, that they ruled a great kingdom, that they were not passive subjects of Egypt but independent, powerful, and innovative. This cultural pride is part of the legacy of Kush, a reminder that history is not just about the past but about identity, about understanding who we are and where we come from. The story of Kush also has broader significance. It challenges the narrative that civilization originated in the Mediterranean world and spread outward, that Africa was a recipient of culture rather than a creator of it. Kush demonstrates that African peoples were building complex societies, creating art and literature, engaging in long-distance trade, and ruling powerful states at the same time as, or even before, many of the civilizations we are taught to revere. It is a reminder that history is more diverse, more complex, more surprising than we often realize. And it is a call to look beyond the familiar narratives, to seek out the forgotten stories, to give voice to the civilizations that have been unjustly erased from our collective memory. And so we come to the end of our journey through the kingdom of Kush. We have traveled from the early settlements along the Nile, through the rise of Kerma with its distinctive culture and its great tumuli burial mounds. We have witnessed the Egyptian conquest and the centuries of cultural fusion that followed as the Kushites absorbed Egyptian religion and writing while maintaining their own identity. We have stood with Piye as he conquered Egypt, reuniting the Nile Valley under Kushite rule, and we have watched the 25th dynasty shine briefly before being driven south by Assyrian invasion. We have moved with the kingdom to its new capital at Meroe, where iron technology and a new script marked the flowering of an independent Kushite culture. We have met the Kandaks, those remarkable warrior queens who ruled in their own right, who led armies and built temples, who negotiated with Rome and left their mark on history. We have explored the religious world of Kush, a complex tapestry of borrowed Egyptian deities and indigenous African gods, of daily rituals and grand festivals, of beliefs about death and the afterlife that shaped everything from burial practices to pyramid construction. We have walked through the markets, witnessing the trade that brought wealth from across the ancient world, from the Mediterranean to the interior of Africa, from the Red Sea coast to the Sahara. We have seen gold and ivory and iron, the resources that made Kush prosperous and powerful. And finally, we have watched the slow decline, the environmental stress and economic disruption, the rise of rival powers and internal instability, the gradual erosion that led to the abandonment of Meroe and the end of the kingdom. We have followed the thread of rediscovery, from looters and early explorers to modern archaeologists, from dismissed ruins to UNESCO World Heritage Sites, from a forgotten footnote in history to a civilization that is finally receiving the recognition it deserves. This has been a story of resilience and adaptation, of a people who survived conquest and thrived, who created their own culture from borrowed elements and indigenous traditions, who ruled an empire and left monuments that still stand in the desert today. But more than that, this has been a story about memory and forgetting, about the way history is written and rewritten, about who gets remembered and who is erased. The kingdom of Kush was a great civilization by any measure. It endured for more than 1,000 years, longer than the Roman Empire, longer than most of the dynasties of China, longer than any modern nation-state. It controlled vast territories, from the Mediterranean to the African interior. It produced art and architecture of lasting beauty. It innovated in technology, developing ironworking and creating a unique writing system. It had powerful rulers, both male and female, who shaped the course of history. And yet, for centuries, it was almost completely forgotten, known only to scholars and barely mentioned in textbooks. This forgetting was not accidental. It was the result of biases, of assumptions that African civilizations were primitive, derivative, unworthy of serious study. It was the result of colonialism, which sought to justify its exploitation of Africa by denying that Africans had ever created anything of value. It was the result of a historical narrative that centered Europe and the Mediterranean, that saw civilization as something that radiated outward from Greece and Rome, ignoring or minimizing the achievements of peoples who were deemed peripheral, backward, other. The rediscovery of Kush is part of a larger project of decolonizing history, of challenging these biases, of giving voice to the silenced, of remembering what was forgotten. The pyramids of Meroe stand today as they have stood for 2,000 years, silent witnesses to a lost world. They are not as large as the pyramids of Giza, not as famous, not as frequently photographed, but they are no less significant, no less worthy of our attention and our respect. They are monuments to human ambition, to the desire to build something that will endure, to the belief that death is not the end, but a transition to something beyond. They are also monuments to cultural identity, to a people who took elements from Egypt but made them their own, who built their pyramids with steeper angles and different proportions, who decorated them with their own script and their own religious imagery, who asserted, through stone and sand, that they were not Egyptians, but Kushites, not imitators but innovators. To stand among these pyramids is to feel the weight of time, to sense the presence of those who came before, to be reminded of the impermanence of all human achievement. The kings and queens who commissioned these structures believed they were building for eternity, that their names would be remembered forever, that their tombs would remain inviolate. But tombs were looted, names were forgotten, and the kingdom itself faded into obscurity. Yet the pyramids remain, and with them, the possibility of remembering, of reconstructing, of honoring what was lost. The temples, too, endure, though many are in ruins, their walls crumbling, their roofs collapsed, their inscriptions worn smooth by wind and sand. But if you stand in the right light, if you look closely, you can still see the carvings, the images of gods and kings, the hieroglyphs and Meroitic script that recorded prayers and proclamations. You can imagine the temples as they once were, vibrant with color, filled with the smell of incense, echoing with the chants of priests, thronged with worshippers. These were not just religious buildings. They were centers of community, places where the divine and the human intersected, where cosmic order was maintained through ritual and sacrifice, where the kingdom affirmed its identity and its connection to the sacred. The artifacts that have survived, the jewelry and pottery and tools and weapons, now sit in museums, removed from their original context, displayed under glass, accompanied by labels that attempt to explain their significance. But no label can fully capture the meaning of these objects. A gold necklace was not just an ornament, it was a symbol of status, a connection to the divine, a piece of craftsmanship that required skill and knowledge passed down through generations. A pottery vessel was not just a container, it was a work of art, decorated with patterns that had meaning, that connected the maker to a tradition, to a community, to a world view. A bronze weapon was not just a tool of war, it was a symbol of power, of the warrior class, of the kingdom's ability to defend itself and project force. These objects are fragments of a lost world, and through them we can glimpse, however imperfectly, the lives of the people who made them and used them. Perhaps the most poignant legacy of Kush is the Meroitic script, those elegant signs carved into stone, written on pottery, inscribed on funerary stelae. We can read them, we can pronounce the words, but we cannot fully understand them. It is like hearing a voice from across a vast distance, faint and indistinct, conveying something important but ultimately incomprehensible. What did these inscriptions say? What prayers were offered? What stories told? What wisdom recorded? We may never know, but the existence of the script itself is significant. It tells us that the Kushites valued literacy, that they saw writing as important, that they wanted to record their thoughts and their history for future generations. The fact that we cannot read it is frustrating, but it is also a reminder of how much we have lost, how many voices have been silenced, how much knowledge has disappeared into the silence of time. Yet we remember what we can. We remember Piye and his conquest of Egypt, Taharqa and his golden age, Amun and her defiance of Rome, Amun and her treasure. We remember the artisans who worked gold and iron, the farmers who tilled the fields along the Nile, the priests who chanted in the temples, the merchants who traveled across deserts and seas. We remember the kingdom that endured for 1,000 years, that adapted and survived, that created beauty and built monuments, that left a mark on history even if that mark was nearly erased. And in remembering, we honor them, we give them back their place in history, we ensure that they are not forgotten again. As the night deepens, and our story draws to a close, let the images of Kush linger in your mind. The steep pyramids rising from golden sand, the stone lions guarding temple gates, the relief carvings showing warrior queens and lion-headed gods, the workshops filled with the sound of hammers and the glow of forges, the markets bustling with trade, the Nile flowing eternal through the heart of it all. This was a real place, inhabited by real people, who loved and fought and built and believed, who created a civilization that deserves to be remembered alongside Egypt and Rome and all the other great powers of the ancient world. The kingdom of Kush is Africa's forgotten empire, but it is forgotten no longer. Through the work of archaeologists and historians, through the preservation of sites and artifacts, through stories like the one we have shared tonight, it is being brought back into the light, reclaimed from the shadows of history. And in that reclaiming, there is a larger truth, a reminder that history is not fixed, not settled, not complete. There are always more stories to tell, more voices to hear, more civilizations to remember. The past is vast and complex, and we have only begun to explore it. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the kingdom of Kush. Thank you for your patience, for your curiosity, for your willingness to travel with me to a place and time that is both distant and profoundly important. The story of Kush is a story about human resilience, about the ability to create beauty and meaning in a harsh world, about the endurance of memory even in the face of forgetting. It is a story worth telling, worth hearing, worth remembering. And now, as the desert wind blows across the pyramids and the stars shine over the ruins, as the echoes of ancient voices fade into silence, I wish you rest. May your dreams be filled with golden sands and stone monuments, with the sight of the Nile flowing eternal, with the knowledge that the past, though distant, is never truly lost. Sleep well, and until our next journey into history, good night.